I think one of my favorite parts about episode 9 of Uncle from Another World is as soon as the Sega console seemingly broke down and he was freaking out, I thought to myself, well, just use your spirits, use your magic, just fix it. Like, it's not a big deal, you can easily do it. And then quickly into this episode, they decide to use spirits to essentially cool the apartment down, and we see the cost of casually using that power, because it almost brought the end of the world, basically, unless they gave a cow's head. That was the thing. Hey, you give us a cow's head as a ritual, we're A-okay. You don't do it, well, we're gonna just wipe out humanity. And the fact that the spirits, they are so just, they don't care so much. It's just more like, you give us this and we'll be okay. But the fact that humanity dying is the equivalent of a fish head to them. This show has done such a good job with its magic system and the fact that there's actually some really interesting concepts at play underneath this hilarious coding that is the Uncle from Another World experience. Now, I do have a full live reaction available on the Patreon if you're interested, of course, but this one was good. I'd say out of the 2 episodes since the show came back, I would give episode 9 a bit of an edge to episode 8. Not to say episode 8 was anything to shy away from, it was a great episode, but I just found like the humor really clicked with me. Not only did we get another joke with him giving someone a ring, this time to a dude who wanted nothing to do with him, and the fact that even this dude was getting flustered and his men were basically congratulating him on his new marriage. The show just had a lot of fun with the silly ideas, but I think because it's surrounded by this concept of like what spirits are and the fact that, you know, essentially he calls them up on the telephone and they say it's okay for a fish head, like there's some demonic shit at play, but I like how rather than it being like, as someone like Takafumi, oh, spirits are these beautiful anime women, right? You know, that's who you would meet up with. And he's like, no, it's more of a feeling, and that feeling literally almost brought humanity to ruins, and all Uncle could do was say, well, I guess I'm gonna make myself some food if this is gonna be my last year on Earth, I want to have a full stomach. Like, I really like that for being, you know, a gap, right? There was a 2-month and some odd week gap between episode 7 and 8, and the fact that it doesn't feel that much of a dip in quality, because the issue that this show ran into was that there was literally no animators to work on the episode. And if you look at the fight last week, if you look at the dragon fight in this episode, you would be shocked that there was a delay at all. There's definitely those standard shots that you can tell are a little more rushed, a little less refined. But as I said in my video last week, it's a comedy series, so a more dip in art style is easier to overlook because you're laughing, you're having fun. The character designs are changing anyway, so it's not as much of a noticeable difference if it's a serious bloody show sort of a thing. But I will say, my hunch tells me that the key fights that we saw in this episode and last episode most likely were pretty close, if not completed, before the break happened, and I feel like a lot of the catch-up that they had to do over the past couple of months was probably a lot of the more simple moments. Because just based on my knowledge of anime production, how the animation cycle works, stuff like this would be pretty hard to do unless they really just found the right animator who could work on it for a couple of weeks, because otherwise it just doesn't make sense, especially given how much of a production hell this show actually ended up in. I mean, I'm glad that it looks as good as it does, because these past 2 episodes just feel like a return to form. That is back to Uncle that as we've known and loved, if not more funny and more engaging. I mean, they're casually revealing information that I guess was previously not known. It's hard to, like, it didn't come as a surprise, but I can't tell if that's maybe because I accidentally had it spoiled for me or not, but the characters themselves were quite surprised that, you know, this elf, tsundere elf, as, you know, Takafumi might call, is actually a princess. And to see how, if you watch after the credits, I think this is probably the funniest moment out of the 2 episodes, hands down, is after the credits, there's like this parasite that goes into the stomach and rips from the outside. And Heartboy comes in a very restraining order fashion and just lifts someone sleeping to examine the stomach, and then it basically does it to best tsundere elf. And I love how instead of just ending it there, which I thought that was funny, that was all well and good. I mean, Uncle, I've said it before, probably needs a restraining order in this world or whatever the equivalent is. And then you see him get absolutely murdered by the parasite that's coming from him. And then he's like, hey, you guys ready to eat fish? And then they decide to get pizza. And it's just like the goofiness and the silliness, it basically writes itself. But I love how it does feel like a connected, like, hey, here's the shit I went through my isekai life. Let's watch it as our TV day in and day out, as they just casually bond. Like the moment when they were basically scared to turn off the spell because, I mean, the spirit that started it wanted to wipe out humanity. If you open up a window, that'd probably be considered disrespectful. And I mean, if that was willing to destroy humanity, I mean, that's probably an immediate nuclear disaster. So I get it, they're huddling under the covers, but it was kind of sweet, right? They were just bonding and they really felt like this weird family that you just couldn't help but love. And I think one of the things that makes Uncle such a fascinating character is that if you take a step back and you've never seen Uncle, you've never met Uncle, I mean, he's the type of guy you walk to the other side of the road so you don't have to interact with. But once you know Uncle, he's just that weird uncle in your family. But then there's sometimes he'll do things or say things that you just are like, even I can't defend you, Uncle, but that's why we love this show, right? I mean, I walked in this episode thinking the whole dinosaur transformation, which I guess they're considered dragons, I thought that was going to be like the main thing that kicked off the episode. They almost just completely gloss over it. They do touch upon it later in the episode. But I thought it was hilarious because that's just Uncle, right? That type of shit can happen. Yeah, if you stay transformed for too long, you'll be permanent. As we see his giant badass fire dragon, he was trapped like that for a month. So it's very much like they casually touch upon these like world mechanics, these magic mechanics that are actually a lot more detailed than a lot of series in the isekai setting, and especially since this is like a reverse isekai, right? It's interesting how much in-depth they go into it, especially because in an isekai world, you don't really think a lot about the spirits, the magic systems at play. But when you bring that into the human world that is normal and doesn't see flying dragons or firebolts raining from the sky, you see how it can almost accidentally bring about the world's end if you don't pay 5 million yen for a cow in order to be a sacrifice, and then luckily you had a fish and that was apparently just as good for the spirits. Like, it's just absolutely bonkers. The thing I'm actually kind of interested in is clearly, like, we know he ends up coming back to the human world, right? And we can see he kind of is building his own little love interest, almost a harem, you could say. Hell, you know what, I'm calling it a harem at this point because the man he basically proposed to again in this episode, he seemed too flustered to say no. So at this point, the number of characters who thinks he's an orc but still end up falling for him, like the removal, right? I'm very interested in seeing, hopefully this season, right, at the very least, their reaction to him disappearing. Does he end up dead in that world so then he comes back here? Maybe that's the direction. Like, I do want to see that because there's definitely always these room for emotional, because sometimes the comedy series that are as silly as this, the emotional moments hit a lot harder than something that's typically mundane or serious for the most part, because you're not really expecting it quite as hard. So when it hits you a lot harder than probably the truck that isekai'd my boy, right? So I like that they're really kind of playing with Uncle's character development at this point. Like last week, you saw a side of Uncle you didn't really see before. He actually seemed a lot more human, and even in episodes like these, it just feels like we're seeing him more as a person and less just as a ridiculous comedy object like I think the first half of this anime season delivered. But another great episode. I think it's 2 for 2 since the return, and hopefully it will just be another smooth sailing to the next episode and all the way to the home stretch. But thoughts, feelings yourself down below. Leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new around here. Like I mentioned, there is a full live reaction on the Patreon. You can also get video shoutouts, so do consider that if you so wish. So until next time, everyone, please take care. Have a good one.